Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hi, this is Nick Anastasiou, story editor on Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Bad Batch. And you are listening to Aggressive Negotiations.
Welcome back to the number one podcast for Purgle watching, Aggressive Negotiations, your Star Wars show here on the Nerd Party Network, where we explore all of the vast, deep, and amazing corners of the Star Wars galaxy. I'm one of your humble hosts, John Mills, and with me, as always, is the revered Jedi Master and Purgle massage therapist, Jedi Master Matthew Rushing. Matt, are you limber? Are you ready for tonight's show?
I've got to always stay limber, especially with the Purgle massage therapy that I do. The bigger the Purgle, the harder it is to work on. And so, those industrial size clampers that I have to use as well to make my hands larger so that, it's oh man. But I'm just surprised that we don't already have Purgle Podcast out there as the new Star Wars podcast. I love the idea of Purgle Watch as a podcast name for a Star Wars podcast. I think that's hilarious.
Now you've put it out there, and now we know as well that we sometimes are trendsetters within the Star Wars podcast galaxy. It's bound to happen. But I can also tell you what's bound to happen is people will ignore this part when I tell them that you should go over to Apple Podcasts and give us a star rating and review if you haven't already. Reach out to us on thenerdparty.com/contact, or you can even reach out to us on Twitter, whatever it's called now. You can reach out to us on it at the Jedi Masters, and you can, of course, find the network at Join Nerd Party and the Nerd Party on Facebook and Instagram, which is really the same platform, but whatever. And nobody yet on the network doing TikTok dances, but we'll get there. So, Matt, we've been delving into some sort of like non-traditional territory for us recently in these episodes. And I think one of the reasons is there's a lot of stuff to talk about. We've been talking about physical media and what it means for this and what it means for that. And something that we sort of like have navigated around on the edges of, but I really just want to embrace here because of some conversations I've had recently. If anybody is coming to the show new at some point in the future, we're recording this during the height of the Ahsoka series.
Yes.
And its debut on the Disney Plus. Season 1 of the Ahsoka series debuting on Disney Plus. And I want to ask you, Matt, and we're going to have some controversial questions probably. I've encountered a number of people in my personal life that are not the caricatures that you encounter online who have nothing good to say about any Star Wars material released, usually since the 1980s. Definitely since Disney took over. At what point can we as a fan base start ignoring the people who are never happy with Star Wars? And how can we encourage them to let it go and just accept that it's time to move on?
Well, that's a really interesting question. But first, John, I have something to say. That is actually an autographed picture of Alec Guinness signed by Ewan McGregor that is worth $150. And so,
Thank you, comic book guy.
Changed it just for the show.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting question because as you brought this up, I was listening to a podcast that will go unnamed with a host on there who is frequently speaking derogatory comments toward anything Star Wars after Empire Strikes Back. And I think to myself, why do you continue to watch these things? Why do you even continue to think about these things if it's something that you haven't liked, since the second film? It would be akin to someone getting to Alien 3 and then getting past that and not liking anything else and still saying, you know, oh, they're an Alien fan. I mean, you're a fan of 2 films. So, you know, I mean, there's so many, I think, different places where you could talk about this idea. And so I think it is a valid question because, you know, we don't want to be considered like gatekeepers, but
that's exactly what I was going to go into was like, you know, there's always that danger of like gatekeeping. It's like, how dare you say I'm not a Star Wars, I'm an original Star Wars fan. I like the originals. But I had an involved discussion with somebody where he was telling me he had just started the Ahsoka show. And I said, oh, well, I'll be tight-lipped. I won't spoil anything. And he cynically just says, oh, I know where it starts. I know where it's probably going to end up. It doesn't matter. I don't care. And I said, yeah, but it gets pretty weird, and that's pretty awesome. I love Star Wars when it's weird. And he says to me, yeah, well, I haven't liked anything since the original trilogy. And I didn't get upset. I mean, I looked at him, I said, that's fine. I don't make money either way. What do I care? And I mean that. I don't really like care. It's nothing I'm ever going to get upset about. It's literally something that just puzzles me because it's like somebody who is forced to do a sport by their parents growing up. I can understand why that kid grows to hate peewee football or baseball or soccer,
right?
Because they didn't want to do it in the first place.
Yeah.
But part of the point of growing into adulthood is you have agency. And if you don't like a thing, why would you continue? And when I asked him and I said, why are you still watching if you haven't liked anything? And he, he of course started bashing the prequels again. I said, okay, whatever. I said, so why are you still watching? And he looked at me and he said, I don't know. And that's the part that puzzles me is Star Trek, because we're both fans of Star Trek.
Right.
I'm not fans of everything Star Trek's done, but I'm a Star Trek fan. There are things that are Star Trek that I've liked. Mm-hmm. I never fault Lower Decks, which I think is one of my favorite shows to watch right now. Mm-hmm. If you're not a Star Trek fan, that show is not for you. You're not going to get any of the jokes.
Yeah. No, I agree.
So why is Star Wars held to this standard where they have to care? Like, why is this obligation put on Star Wars as a franchise to have to appeal to even the people that don't really like it anymore?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question because I was thinking back, what are some of the things that, I really enjoy that maybe I've stopped watching? And mainly because I just didn't like it so much. I was like, I can't stomach anymore, and there's no reason for me to watch it because I don't think I'm ever going to be turned around. And I thought of 2 things that had just started in the last couple of years where I've got 3 books left in the Wheel of Time series. So I've been reading that. It's a massive undertaking. It's 14 books, it's thousands upon thousands of pages long. So I'm very invested in this world at this point. And then the show came out. I was very excited that it was going to be on. Some great talent in that show. And the show to me was awful. I mean, and I do mean legitimately awful, terrible, just wrecking the source material. It just not a good show, not well produced. It just looks like garbage, the whole thing. It was one of those things where we were actually going to podcast about it on the 602 Club, and I decided not to because I had literally nothing good to say about the show. So I was like, why would I talk about it? Same thing happened with the Lord of the Rings series on Amazon. So Amazon has now ruined 2 fantasy series that I love. And so... But I just made a decision. I finished both first seasons just to give it a complete chance. Hated both of them. I will never watch them again. Why would I invest my time, And so I think then to transport that though to Star Wars, it just seems like that there is this group of people who, yes, they loved 2, maybe 3 films. Most of them hate Return of the Jedi, though. That's when their hatred started.
Well, they hated it they hated it until the prequels gave them something else to hate.
Right. And so I think what it is this desire to recapture a magic that they can't recreate, because it's the same reason I believe that, like, I don't really love The Goonies. Goonies is, to me, a film that you needed to have watched when you were a certain age. It would have captivated your imagination, and you would have loved it for the rest of your life. You watch it as an older adult, though, and it just doesn't hold up.
Let me throw a timeout on you there. I just wanted to interject really quick to say there were those of us who went through Goonies mania that didn't care for it. So I mean, I think that's the thing, is that what the problem is that what you ended up loving about a thing was your reaction to it at a certain time period. And you can't go back and get that unless you approach that subject matter and that material with that same type of mindset, which is difficult to do as an adult because we approach things with different sensibilities as we get older. Whereas instead of approaching that thing based on its criteria, not my criteria, what Star Wars hasn't changed. But what I think maybe Star Wars is probably does change as I get older, and I my tastes change. It's like going from maybe you're a kid and you grow up and you love Kenny Loggins, but something changes in you, and all of a sudden you're listening to Led Zeppelin and Metallica. Now, see, what's interesting here is, I think that's at the crux of. And here comes one of those fine lines again. But I think that probably there's a part of me that reflexively was incapable of ever fully embracing even The Force Awakens, specifically because it felt like something constructed to appeal to the guy that was sitting there talking to me saying he didn't like anything since the original trilogy.
Exactly.
But it still backfired. Didn't it still backfire? Like, you can't go back again. To your point, everybody wants to recapture that youthful thing. And then that was attempted, and it was a huge financial success, but there was still that segment hates that too.
Yep.
So it's like there's even a segment of this segment. And the thing is, I'm trying to wrap my head around it, because if I don't like something, I just stop watching.
There was a really interesting podcast that was done called The Redemption of Jar Jar Binks, which basically was the story of the internet's first main character.
Yeah.
And the way in which that firestorm happened. And I think, though, that ignited in all fandoms and the entire internet this idea that the way to get noticed is to cry about something and how much I hate it and how much it ruined my childhood. And maybe this is going to sound terrible, but it's this victimhood status, I think, in fandom. And you don't have to watch things you don't like. I think that's the thing. If you're not continuing to enjoy a franchise, don't watch it. Case in point, I watched a couple of episodes of the Star Trek Discovery. Realize, not for me. I don't like the show. I don't think it fits in Star Trek at all. I don't even think it's a good show in general. Am I out there continually posting about how much I hate Star Trek Discovery and how much I think it's awful and how nobody should watch it, and if you like it, you're a bad Star Trek fan? And I'm the only good Star Trek fan because I realize it's terrible. No, it just doesn't work for me. So I didn't watch it, but I've watched Star Trek Picard. I've watched Strange New Worlds. I've watched, Lower Decks, and each one I like to a certain degree. Star Trek Picard season 3 I thought was phenomenal. Star Trek Strange New Worlds I thought had a great first season, a very uneven second season. Lower Decks has been from great to really not great to me, but I continually watch it because I find it pretty funny for the most part, and just enjoyable. So it's like, but I don't have to watch the thing that I don't like.
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about Lower Decks, just as a quick interjection, is it is a comedy animated show. So even if there's an episode you're not nuts about, it's done in 22 minutes, and you're like, okay, that's done.
Exactly.
Next one's up.
Like the Peanut Hamper episodes, which I think should be destroyed. But that's a different story.
Before we get too sidetracked.
Anyway.
And the thing is, again, to go back on it, we're not telling anybody not to watch, and we're not telling anybody this literally is it. Is it just, let's just close it out with the question then. Did you just hit on it? Is it that our entire culture in the era of social media has turned into getting attention by being hateful and terrible about a franchise, as opposed to and I've been caught up in it. It used to be a lot of fun to jump on that sort of insult comic bandwagon. Remember the really harsh insult comics that were really popular in the 2000s?
Or the comic, really the insult dog,
Well, okay, Triumph
the comic insult.
The insult
that
dog
was hilarious. But that's the whole point. It was there to get a rise out of people. Yeah.
Well, I think what it is, and again, I'll cop to it. I've fallen victim to this over time, but that which is funny to witness isn't necessarily something you should adopt. Is it just that we've trapped ourselves in a pattern of only reinforcing our worst behaviors because that's all we encounter? And so we wind up mimicking, because you mimic the social cues that you're immersed in. If you don't like it, you move on. Just keeping it in the context of it's just a movie. It's not a part of my identity. Mm-hmm. It's just a thing I enjoy. And if I stop enjoying that thing, that's okay too.
So another thing that, and this is just kind of tangential to what we're talking about, but it's an example of something to which I've had to step away from because it was creating this serious unease in me. And it was creating in all honesty, a real sense of anger, frustration, anxiety, honestly. And that was, I used to be much more of a political junkie and listening to tons of news podcasts and all of these things. And what I was finding was all of those things that I just mentioned. And I realized I can just stop listening to them, and my mental health is going to be so much better for it, right? And I think, you guys talked about Tomorrowland on House Lights not too long ago. And one of the points of Tomorrowland is the question of what wolf do we feed? Do we feed the wolf of hate, or do we feed the wolf of hope and inspiration? And I think too many times in our lives, we're feeding the wolf of hate, but our society helps us do that because us being outraged about something seems as though that's the thing that we're supposed to be, because that's what everybody seems to be all the time. And it's like we've lost the ability to be anything else, right? Both you and I talked about the Kenobi series recently, going through it as a rewatch, and neither of us came out of that with glowing reviews.
True. Do
we hate the show? Do we spend copious amounts of time pointing out all the problems with it online? No, we both do assembling Avengers over on the 602 Club. And
yes, we do.
We've talked about some Marvel things in Phase 4 that we have loathed, and I do mean loathed.
Factual.
I don't actually see you talking about Eternals constantly online and how it's ruined your life and your enjoyment of Marvel, right? So it is very strange. I think Star Wars is special, and part of that is that Star Wars tapped into us this thing that was so intrinsic. Like George Lucas tapped into the idea of the hero's journey and the pseudo-spirituality that so many people were longing for, not only in the 70s, but the 80s, 90s, and now into the 2000s, where, you know, people, they're missing something in their life. And for a brief moment in time, for many people, that gave it to them. And they can't get that back, right? And I think that, you know, it's what I said back when we did the Superman episode on the 602 Club. I think it was episode 89. And I said, when we were talking about the Man of Steel version, it's like Superman hasn't changed, but we've changed. Star Wars hasn't changed, but for many people, they've changed. And they can't rectify the way in which that change actually reflects badly on them, not the actual content.
Well, I would say not even badly so much as, you know, there are things that I enjoyed as when I was younger that I enjoy in that context. And it's, I mean, I think the only way I can possibly square this circle is to say that Star Wars became such a cultural force that its value is disproportionate to its role.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
It used to be in the 80s, everybody loved to make fun of Star Trek fans. I mean, openly mocked Trekkies. And now it seems as if there was a warning there. Something that we recognized intrinsically, that it was dangerous to make so much of your identity entwined with that piece of entertainment.
Yeah, absolutely.
That you enjoyed.
I mean, I think...
Keep in mind before anybody thinks I'm saying anything too negative, but before you respond, you're talking to a guy that has Star Wars tattoos on his arms.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm not putting a boundary on anyone because that's how entwined it is with my brain pattern. So just when I said what I said, I didn't say it to put limits on anybody's way of enjoying something. Just, I feel like we need to always put those sort of qualifiers out there.
Yeah. You know, I think what you said is the danger. If we put our identity in things that are temporal, they're always going to let us down, you know, to get super philosophical, right? And I think that's the problem of wrapping up our identity in anything that's in the shifting sands, like entertainment. You know, there's going to be ups and downs. There's ups and downs to Star Wars, you know? I mean, it's not as though each of us are even sitting here and saying, you know what, every Star Wars movie is a 5-star movie. I don't think either of us would say that. And so...
I might. I'll put it this way. Neither of us is sitting here defending the holiday special, right?
Yeah. I mean, okay, even as much as I love the Clone Wars or Rebels or, you know, any of the animated series, right? I don't love every single episode the same.
That's true.
You know?
It's about loving the whole and not the part.
And so, you know, I think the biggest thing that I would say is this. If something in entertainment is not bringing you the same amount of happiness, then it's okay to stop watching it. And I also think it's okay to say, you know what? I liked those first 2 movies, but I don't really like anything else. And to really, you know, not be a fan of something. You don't have to be a fan of Star Wars if you don't really like most of Star Wars. That's okay. I'm not going to hold it against you. Like, you know, it's like I'm still a James Bond fan, though, and I don't like a bunch of those movies. You know, most of them Roger Moore movies, you know, but that's a different story.
That, you know, that is actually a fantastic comparison there, because both of us are James Bond fans, but you give me a day and a half to curb stomp Moonraker, I'll spend all day absolutely taking a sledgehammer to that movie. I like that. Oof.
Yeah.
But I still
exactly
love what I love.
Right. Like, I mean, but and the same could be said for, like, you know, Octopussy or A View to a Kill. It's like, oh my gosh, please never make me watch those movies again. But at the same time,
Roger Moore's batting average was so bad.
Yeah, but at the same time, the like you said, it's the overall whole that I love of James Bond. And yes, there are some that I can, like, I mean, gosh, give me On Her Majesty's Secret Service or, you know, Casino Royale, Goldfinger, From Russia with Love. I mean, some just amazing.
Spy Who Loved Me.
Yeah, and that, yes, no, 100%. I mean, Roger Moore's greatest right there. So,
hands down.
You know, but yes, I love some of these films so much, but I don't love the entire whole, and that's okay. But, you know, I think when you get down to it, if somebody literally only likes the first 2 Star Wars films and they don't like anything else, you know, I think that's the point. It's like if you only liked 2 James Bond films of 25 films, you're not a fan. You're just a fan of a couple of movies. The same thing with Star Wars. And it's okay to be that. I don't want to take that away from anyone. I don't have a problem if that's where you are. I mean, you know what? I'll disagree with you, but whatever, it's fine. It's, in the end, it's literally just entertainment, and it's here to bring us some happiness in a world that's, you know, just insane. So if you don't enjoy something, go find something you do enjoy and enjoy that.
Yeah, let's all be happy. How about that?
I mean, so don't worry, be happy.
You know, now I got that song in my head.
You're
Thanks
welcome.
You know, now is my way of thanking you, because we've undoubtedly misstated something or
probably
trod across a line. Where can people find you online to go?
Oh, yes, please do. I like being yelled at in social media. Please, Matt Rushing02.
It's true, he does.
And Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and Vero are the places I'm most active. Of course, you can also find me here on the network with Owlpost. I talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series with Drea Kaufman. You can also find me on the TFM network. I mentioned with the 602 Club, talking about all the franchises we love outside of Star Trek. And then inside of Star Trek, you'll find me doing Literary Treks, The Orb, Warp 5, The Artificial Tango, and Saddle Up. But John, you know, if people are thinking, you know, I've never heard a voice of wisdom so wonderful, where could they find you?
Oh my gosh. I don't know what voice you're hearing in your head, but it ain't mine. But you can find me as Kessel Junkie online. And you can find me here on the network co-hosting a show called House Lights, where I, you know, every so often get to torture my co-hosts with movies they haven't encountered.
Ooh, like
they
Excalibur?
Torture me too, but boy, tune in for that one, folks.
I can't wait.
I can tell you that one's going to be pretty great. Oh, that's going to be awesome.
A movie I can't stop watching, but I don't love. It's weird.
You know? Yeah.
Anyway.
It's going to be...
Anyway. Totally different story.
So... Yeah, you know. But anyway, you know, before this goes any more off the rails, Master Rushing, I think it's time to close these negotiations.
John, negotiations are closed.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.